When I was a child, one summer we went to visit relatives in the state of Louisiana. The region was all swamps and dense forests, an eerie, almost haunted place. Our relatives lived in a small village on the edge of the woods. Basically, it was more like a summer cottage settlement than a real town. We arrived in the afternoon. It was overcast and raining. While we were settling down, the adults started making a grill under the awning. The women were working in the kitchen, and I was the only child there, so I was bored. Toward evening, we ate steaks, sat down at the table as a merry group, adults drinking vodka. The fog came from the marshes. It was often like that there in summer. In between singing songs, relatives told stories about local people. One of them deserves special attention because it is directly related to what happened next. There was an old grandfather who lived in their tree. His old house was practically in the forest, and the grandfather was very rarely seen well, if once every couple of years. The grandfather never talked to anyone, wore the same clothes, and always avoided people. None of the locals knew how old he was. He seemed to be the oldest in the village. Among the oddities, in winter there was never any smoke coming out of his house. There were no relatives of his. At least no one saw them. When grandfather appeared at the edge of the forest, he looked for a minute in the direction of the village, then turned around and went into the forest. His house was never lit from the inside. So we sit, eat, have fun. The fog came down. It was like milk. It lasted for a couple of hours until it started to get dark. Then it slowly dissipated. Someone came up with an idea. If the fog had cleared, we should take a picture of the whole crowd against the background of the forest. The places are beautiful after all, before it got dark. We got together and took a picture with the then fashionable Polaroid. I remember that on the developed picture, there were a lot of such small defects of shooting in the form of perfectly round balls, and they were mostly concentrated around that grandfather's house. After that, the men went to bed. The women stayed talking on the veranda and finishing their wine, and I went with them. They started gossiping about their relatives. Then they started talking about the locals again and remembered this old man again. And I was looking at Polaroid pictures, and I came across a general picture. Children are very impressionable creatures. When I saw the old man's house surrounded by balloons in the background, I was frightened. And when, in the next picture, I saw the old man himself in the distance, retreating into the forest with some kind of bag, I felt that it was beyond me to look at it all alone. I showed the pictures to my mother and sister, and they passed them around. They all agreed that it was horrible. What happened next traumatized my psyche for the rest of my life. Late at night, we got ready for bed. We went to see our neighbors off their house, stood between our house and the old man's. We approached the house, hugs, goodbyes. And then we heard a strange hum, as if we were standing in a big long pipe, and there was wind outside, and from the opposite end of the pipe came such a characteristic sound. Can you imagine what I'm talking about? Except that we were standing on the street, and the hum was coming from the forest and spreading throughout the neighborhood. I began to slowly merge from fear. More on that. A new sound like a grunt was added to the rumble dam. It's still in my ears. It was coming from the direction of the old man's house. My sister and my godmother went home to get the men. My godmother was on the verge of a heart attack. The neighbors came out, also at the sound. Our men from the house came running. No one said a word. Everyone just stood there, listening to the sounds and succumbing to the seemingly gratuitous panic. My mother took my father and me by the hands. As a result, the whole group moved towards the hut in the forest. As we approached, we smelled a foul odor. The smell of metal mixed with the smell of old or something. It was like the stench of decomposition. We approached the house. It was unclear whether there was anyone inside or not. Everyone was terribly reluctant to knock on the door. Not only was the old man frightening, but it was night and those sounds. The door was unlocked. The neighbor was the first to enter, followed by all the others. The house was in a terrible state of ruin, and there was a tremendous stench. They went into the living room or the dining room and were stunned by what they saw. A grandmother was lying on the floor. There was something like a muzzle on her head, and she had no legs and no arms. Apparently, they had been amputated long ago. She was making grunting sounds. We realized that her chest had been punctured. Nearby on the floor was a pin. This is the kind of pin used to pierce the heart of pigs when they are slaughtered. The women came to their senses and rushed to help. The sight was disgusting, with blood pouring from his pierced chest and sniffing sounds mixed with grunting. My father turned me against the wall so I wouldn't have to look. The neighbor ran home to call an ambulance. The ambulance arrived about 40 minutes later, and the police came with them. The rumbling had stopped by then. The investigators later came to the conclusion that the grandmother had been locked up for 40 years, and the grandfather had slowly cut her up. First thing he did was cut her vocal cords so she couldn't scream. Hell knows how he stopped the bleeding and how Grandma survived. She ended up dying in the hospital, and nobody ever saw my grandfather from that day on. All that remains is his silhouette on a photograph of him in the evening, far away at the edge of the forest.